Vision. Maybe just short of roadmaps, this term strikes fear into the hearts of product leaders. In fact, the question that I have for this episode has been at the top of my opportunity backlog since day one. But it took me quite a while to find 5 brave product leaders who are willing to share their thoughts and answer the question, how do you craft and communicate product vision? And that's what we're covering in this episode of Fearless Product Leadership. Why is the topic of product vision intimidating to product leaders? Well, my hypothesis is that product leaders feel inadequate with how they approach vision for a few reasons. One, it's amorphous. What should it look like? And it's difficult to find examples online other than some fill-in-the-blank statements. Second, it's difficult to measure efficacy. How do I know that we've hit on the right combination of storytelling and evidence that will stir the crowds into action? And 3, it's scary. I mean, what if we get it wrong? What if we're clear on the vision, but we can't actually deliver on it? So these are totally rational fears, and I think it does, in fact, cause product leaders to just avoid it and not put it out there in terms of the vision that they believe will draw customers into the product to achieve company goals and make their lives better. But I wanted to get perspectives from experienced product leaders who have already been through the trial and error of crafting and communicating product vision to get their best practices, and that's what I'm bringing to you in this episode. We're going to hear how 5 experienced product leaders who are savvy in their product vision practices tackle that job. At the end, I'm going to share my own tips to create a vision that is motivating for your teams and doesn't pigeonhole your product experience. Fearlessly tackling the question, how do you craft and communicate product vision, are Albert Lee, co-founder and former head of product at MyFitnessPal, Ben Newell, former VP of product at Reward Style and Sabre, Ezine Udweze, VP of Product Management at Procore, although she was at Bizarre Voice at the time of this interview, Troy Anderson, SVP of Product and Technology at Spins, and Prasad Gunay, SVP of Product at Signified.
You know, it's kind of interesting. This question I actually think is pretty interesting in terms of I think it's a problem. Like, communicating a product vision is obviously something that many people end up being tasked with. And I remember very distinctly kind of the first time that I ever got asked to sort of illustrate a product vision. And you're going to laugh about this, but sort of the silliest thing that I did was I started Googling, right? I go on Google, I search for, product vision example, something super simple like that. And it's funny, what it comes back with is a whole bunch of these slides, right, that have diagrams on them, or sort of like these weird charts. That's kind of half of the stuff you see. The other half is maybe a single statement, right? Like a vision statement. And I was like, wow, this is kind of it. And so I sort of thought about that for a bit. And one thing that was really clear when you would look at slides like this, and I had obviously even seen some similar to that in my work, was, these are just so abstract, right? And I think you're trying to balance this idea of, not being so specific that you can't be aspirational with what you're trying to show, but also have it be clear, something that can really serve as guidance to your team, to the individuals, to anyone who, is sort of responsible for contributing to the ultimate goal of achieving this vision. And so, with that kind of idea in mind, one thing that I decided to try after that was to actually develop essentially a prototype, right? So that was kind of my next idea, which is I'm going to build a prototype. I'm going to work with some people on my team. It's going to be something that's almost functional, where you can kind of maybe it doesn't have a back end, but you're kind of tapping through different stuff and you can actually walk along sort of this journey with it. And that certainly solved some of that problem, right? It was really specific. It was something that people could totally feel as being very tangible. But you kind of introduce this other issue where it's almost like it's too real. and all of a sudden everybody starts getting fixated on these little details. And maybe most importantly, it really loses its kind of aspirational nature, right? All of a sudden it's like, wow, we're spending all of our time so we can get to this funky prototype that Albert and a couple other people developed. Like, this is like, why am I doing this? And so, where I ultimately landed, and this is something that I've done a few times and I thought was really effective, was developing essentially kind of customer storyboards. And so literally, or hopefully everyone has kind of seen like examples of storyboarding, how it's used in like commercials or movies, but, a series of illustrations that kind of walks through a very specific kind of experience. And if you lead into that with a really clear sort of detailing of like how you see your customer, how you see their problems, I think the end result can be really powerful, where it's like all of a sudden the whole team really understands like, here's how we see our customer, here's how we see these fundamental things that they're dealing with to achieve some goal or to be able to accomplish something, and here's the types of experiences that we aspire to create that are ultimately going to, hopefully allow them to be successful in doing that. And it's like, you're not like showing screenshots, you're not like showing these things that get people bogged down in the details, but in their heads, they can really visualize like, no, this is like what I'm trying to do for my customer. And that feels specific enough that when I'm in my job and I'm trying to make decisions on what to do, or I'm thinking about feature sets, I can sort of say like, how would that live in this world where I'm trying to do X for this individual? So I actually, had a pretty good experience with this. Right towards the end of my time with Under Armour, we were working on a project that was a really difficult one within the company because it was the first project that was integrating like our manufacturing and operations with our software development team, which was really new to the company. And we were actually developing a digitally enabled shoe, a running shoe. And so, the challenge with this is not just that you had to illustrate this compelling product vision to all the people working for you, but you actually needed to bring that to the rest of the company in a way where these people working on the footwear team or in the running category are super excited about what you're trying to deliver for their customers. And so that was really difficult. And so we actually used this kind of methodology to really get alignment and clarity in terms of like, these are how we see our customers. And you actually running category people and footwear people are the ones who are helping us understand this and supplying us with this information. And these are the types of things that we can do with technology to surface that. This is what we're aspiring to do to service that customer. We're going to help them avoid injury by giving them all these really interesting pieces of data in terms of like how they run. We're going to improve their performance by essentially showing them that like how they change the way that they train. And those things were really clear at the end of the day to those individuals, which we thought was a big success. And it helped us obviously get some really, really clear alignment on like, what are we trying to build now?
So you asked kind of the most effective way to create and communicate a product vision. I think the first part is a really interesting one, which is how to create it. I had an interesting path in my career where I switched industries. And it was a little tough stepping into a new industry and not immediately having a product vision. I had been in the travel industry for 17 years. I knew it backwards and forwards. I knew all the players, and setting a product vision for things that I had been working on. In many cases, I had already done that, and that's what brought me to that role. When I switched industries, it was really important for me to not step in and think I knew the right answer right away. I wanted to take time to listen to everyone and really understand what the challenges that our customers were facing were, how our business worked, how did we actually make money, where were the areas that were most successful, and do all of that before I really laid out a product vision. As I was interviewing, I had thoughts, things that I thought would be interesting, but it really took me about 6 months to fully kind of grasp everything and then really go ahead and decide like, hey, I think this is the path we want to take, and lay out that vision. So I think it's important when you're creating one to make sure that you're not going off of your first gut. Make sure you're running it by multiple people. Make sure you're taking input and feedback from others. And when you switch industries, it's a good time to do that. You kind of have a pass for a while. Everybody knows that you don't know all those pieces, and it's a great opportunity to hear from everyone. However, it does come time once you've created it to actually communicate it and to get it out in front of the teams and to vet it and make sure that it's right. I really find there's no better way than pitching it in person quickly to those who are closest to it. So obviously that's your internal teams, and I like to do that all one-on-one. I don't, early you want to make sure you could take somebody's feedback independently. You don't want groupthink to kick in. So, kind of building a vision and putting together a big presentation for the entire executive leadership team before you've had a chance to do that is probably a bad idea. They're probably going to shoot it full of holes and you'll feel in a tough spot. So I like to kind of one-on-one go around, hear everybody's take, see what lands and what doesn't when I talk about it. And then that gives you an opportunity to know where everyone in the room sits when you do actually then communicate it more broadly. And that is important. It's important. I've talked prior about tips for persuasion with executive teams. And one of the things I've said is never ask a question that you don't know the answer to. You want to make sure that you know what everybody's issues are with your vision and before you go pitch it in a broad group. From that point, it's really not that complicated to simply say, well, then you've got to socialize it and repeat it 7 times and just until you're blue in the face of saying it so that everybody understands it. But that's easier said than done. And I think one of the areas where product teams can struggle is the forum that allows them to communicate that. There's not good settings inside the companies that I've worked in, at least, to allow people to regularly share and iterate on that strategy. And so one of the things that I've done in my career is create that forum through a meeting that we just, not creatively, but we called Product Update, which was every 6 weeks, we got in front of the whole company. We talked about what we've been working on and is it working? So a lot of real good, heavy data and sharing A/B test results, sharing interaction, engagement, growth metrics, etc. Sharing what we're working on now and what you should expect to see coming, which is always helpful for people to help prevent product from being that black box. And then lastly, just reiterating our strategy and vision and using the data of what's worked and what hasn't to say, yes, we're still on track, or you know what, maybe we're rethinking this a little bit, or we're refining our strategy based on some of that data. And I think really closing that loop for teams and then giving that forum to continually share it is really, really valuable for product teams to help communicate that product vision.
Just a follow-up question on that. So what is the format that vision takes? Is it words on a slide? Is it the story? Tell me, for you, what was the artifact or visual that helped people understand that vision?
Yeah. It's different from company to company, but one of the things that I have found to be very helpful is a visual story connected with product visuals. So, a prototype that includes a story of a typical user's interaction with this product. And I have found people hesitant to lay that out there for fear that they can't do the things that are listed in the story, or, technically, we may not be able to achieve that, or we're not sure how we would do that, or it's too much money, or, all the reasons why you'd be scared to share a vision. But I have found that unless you do that, nobody really is getting it. I can use words, I can write it down, I can say it to everyone, and people will nod and be like, yes, I get that. And then you see the execution starting to occur, and it's not what you were talking about. It's slightly different, or it's just askew a little bit, or maybe it's the old vision just slightly adjusted to make it look like it's fitting into your pattern. I have found that the visual story, so working closely with design to help tell that story, as well as the using an actual person. Well, now Tina is going to go from here to here, and this is how she's going to interact with it. I was really struggling. And once I did that in the trip case space, it gave me an opportunity. All of a sudden, everyone was like, "Oh, I get it," and like it was completely done. And so I have found, visuals and storytelling to be the best way to help achieve that.
Let's talk about vision.
Okay.
You're right. Vision means a lot of different things to different people. So I'm not going to talk about the vision, the storytelling part for our clients and for people to buy into us as strategic partners. It is more about the vision that helps folks realize and build the product on your behalf. Quite recently, we were using PowerPoints and stories and Jira and some big goals within our wiki system. But we made a shift recently to building out something called a strategic intent document. And it is a Word document that actually explicitly calls out why we were doing what we are doing as a product organization. What are our priorities? And for what amount of time do we think these will be our priorities? What metrics are we trying to move and why? And it's built by the product leadership team. Is us sitting together and saying, these will be what matters to us. And for those 3 or 4 things, we picked 3 areas. We went into details of why. We also talked about what we thought output products might look like, but we left room for the product managers to take their area and build out. But it was important to help concretize, if that's a word, for the R&D organization, the why, and in words, not in PowerPoint, not in a ticket, but a story of why we were doing what we were doing and what exactly we were going to do, and then how it's laddered up to the bigger company vision. And I think that the strategic intent document format has been one of the most successful methods for actually communicating vision. So now we are asking, or at least I'm asking all my product managers to build out something very similar, having to write in words why you're doing what you're doing, what the context, what the metrics are, not as a ticket, but as a story and a narrative, forces you to really list out and seek refinement for those core objectives. And it can bring your engineering team along. Anybody, it's on Confluence now, anybody can read the Uber strategic intent document, and now for each area, the product managers who are responsible have a strategic intent document. And theirs is usually a 6 to 9 month time span. And then as they build out tickets, they tag it and attach it to the intent document. It's working fine, and I'm actually proud of that shift.
I was at a different company, not this one, and on day 1, the CEO said to the entire org, right before I was about to get up to speed, these are our 3 North Stars. And so I got up and, not trying to be popular with the CEO, obviously, I said, no, we can't have 3 North Stars. You have to have kind of 1 North Star. You have to understand what you're trying to solve at the 50,000 foot view. And you can't have 3 of them because the focus is something that's hard enough. You have limited resources as it is. And it's much, much better if you can really come to some clarity on what that 1 North Star is. So start there. You need to understand what you're trying to solve for at the most macro sense. From that, using the same framework as I discussed earlier of why, what, and how, why are we trying to hit this goal? You should have really good reasons, right? So if you use a 5 why framework to say, why do we want to, make $100 million on this product? Or why do we want to have this sort of valuation? You should really decide what those things are. And if your team is not aligned on what you're solving for, are you solving for revenue? Are you solving for EBITDA? Are you solving for valuation? What is the hypothesis? If there's no hypothesis, for me, it's not exactly real. So the best way to get a vision and make it real for people on the ground is to actually tie that vision to some real hypothesis. And putting that real hypothesis together, whether it's, let's say it's to valuation, you should have a model for what your valuation framework is. you should have some thesis for that. Now, if you're held by private equity, or if you're venture capital, or you're public, you could say, well, the return is to the shareholders. Therefore, we want to increase whatever it is that tends to make the stock go up. But you need to align around those things. So one of the best ways to communicate a product vision is to do all the homework beforehand, which I know is annoying, to get your hypothesis tied back to the vision. Because then what happens is that you can take that vision, you can actually break it out into the various groups, right? So from the why perspective, we understand why we're trying to solve this in our hypothesis. And it's okay for the hypothesis to be wrong, right? So you want to be able to update your hypothesis as you go. It's like, oh, well, our valuation went down when we did this. Okay, well, maybe we should have thought about security as an issue, right? So those sort of things are really important. But the key is not to have the right hypothesis. The key is to have one and try and measure against it. So that when your engineering teams are going, well, how does my work pertain to the company? You should be able to draw a very nice line. Now, no one says it has to be exact, right? I think it was Eisenhower who said, planning is essential, but plans are worthless, right? So you need to take that same sort of mind frame when thinking about your product vision to put some math to it, right? So my decision sciences professor, Scott McEwen, back at Kellogg said, verbalize, visualize, mathematize. So if you can draw a picture of it, if you can verbalize it, and you mathematize it. If you can mathematize it, then you really can make it concrete for everyone, which is really important.
So to address the question of what's the most effective way to communicate a product vision, I think it's a great question. I've tried many things over the years, and many things, some of which succeeded and some of which we didn't. And if I start with the ones which didn't work, typically I think the way I think about it is those are written with me and my organization in mind. It was very much let me tell you about the product features I'm building, and here's what I'll do in which quarter. And they lacked context, and they lacked that oomph, if you will. The oomph is a technical term, obviously, as you know, but it really is about, visions are not simply about tactically achieving things or, taking a feature and making it better. I mean, obviously those all fall within, it's parts of the vision for sure, but the way I look at it now, and through tons and tons of trial, error, and learning, is to paint a crystal clear picture of the end state we're aiming for. I think people are inspired by possibility, and unfortunately, I think product folks, we typically tend to be very pragmatic, very practical, and sometimes we step away from the third P, which is possibility. And I think a big part of our role as leaders is to make that real, that possibility real for our teams, obviously, but beyond that, for the rest of the organization, all the way to prospects and customers. And I'll say one thing about what the crystal clear end picture is. It's not just what it means for our company. I think, in fact, actually, the more useful approach I've seen is frame it as an impact for your end customer or end user. And if you do that right, by the way, many good things will happen for the company. So people get that. That's my best approach, and I'll make it as crystal as I can. So a few years ago, I did a presentation, which was a big roadmap presentation, and rather than jump into, okay, here's what we're going to build, I used a framework from a gentleman called Michael Schrage, who's at MIT, and he had an interesting approach, which was asking a question about who do you want your customers to be. And really what his thesis was is that innovators don't just ask their customers or end users to do something different, they ask them to become someone different. And I'd highly recommend, you can find it on Google, I'm sure, getting it's a short book, I think a 100-page book he's written on this topic, but it's really a form of self-actualization, right? Is it that, if you deliver a product or a feature, how does that, it may not transform their whole life, but it may transform some aspect of their life, and they become better at what they do, right? And that was an interesting framing. And I used examples of this. This was in my time at OpenTable. Like one simple example would be, instead of saying, hey, we need to make our hospitality suite best in class. That would be how I might have done it, 10 years ago, saying we got to have a best in class hospitality suite. I might still use that terminology, but to bring it to life, the way I described it was, how do we help a restaurant owner have even a brand new host at their host stand deliver service of the caliber of a maitre d' who's been at the role for 10 or 15 years, right? If you think about restaurants, the challenge has been, 20 years ago, you go to a fancy restaurant, there's a maitre d' who knows you by name, knows your family, knows your preferences. In today's world, that's not possible anymore. And you have people who are relatively new, some are just out of college. But with our tools, we could provide that value, that level of, sort of expertise to somebody who's relatively new. And so that's the way I phrased it. And, we built that product later, a suite of hospitality features to do that. But the framing of here's what it means for an end user was, I think, at least for me, interesting and I think powerful for the end, for the recipients, the people who are hearing it. And that really allowed me to make the concrete, the future really concrete and real for my team.
Crafting and communicating product vision is frequently a dreaded part of the responsibility of a product leader. But as you heard today, it is your responsibility. And it really will facilitate to align your team's work to the company's strategy in the best interest of your desired customers. So let's go back to those top 3 concerns that I shared at the beginning of the episode and what we've learned based on the perspectives of our product leaders. So first, it's amorphous. Yes, I don't know what form it should take. Well, you heard that it is best for that form to not just be a fill-in-the-blank slide, but to actually be a visual representation of your customer's journey and how they've evolved from the painful state that they're in and where they want to be. Second, it is difficult to measure effectiveness, but just like you're not sure when you're creating prototypes, you can test those prototypes on multiple target customers and see if it in fact resonates with them. Same logic applies when you're creating a product vision. Try it on to key target audiences and see what resonates and what falls short so that you can iterate on it. And third, it is scary. Of course it is scary, but that is no reason not to try, because not sharing a product vision leaves your teams aimless, leaves your stakeholders and leadership wondering what the plan is and how you're going to keep motivating people to satisfying the needs of your target customers. The more your vision reflects your customers, your company, your capabilities, your competitive advantage, and your audience, the more momentum you'll garner to do whatever it takes to realize that compelling vision. And so I want to give you a formula, and I'm linking in the show notes that article, as well as some example vision videos that I think you'll find inspirational as you go about crafting your vision. But here's an overview of the formula that I think really helps people create a compelling product vision. 1, you need a hero. You need to have a clear picture of your customer. If it's a B2C customer, you want to know exactly what their characteristics are, their demographics, and where they spend their time. And if it's a B2C customer, you want to be clear on what their role is, what they make decisions about, and what pains them. Which brings us to the second element, which is your hero's goal. What is that problem or unmet need that they're desperately seeking solutions for? And third, the evil spell. So your hero is now under a wicked evil spell, which is essentially the painfully inadequate solutions that they have tried to resolve that unmet need. And then fourth, the magic potion. And this is the visualized future solution of your product. And again, this doesn't need to be very specific. It just needs to demonstrate that you have a website, an app, a notification, some software that is changing the way that they experience and resolve this pain. And then fifth, This is important. It is the hero's self-actualization. What is it that they are now able to do that they've never been able to do before, that they've always wanted to do? What is that future state that they now get to enjoy and realize because of the solution that you've provided to them? And then last but not least, why us? Why is this meaningful and important for your employees so that they are emotionally connected and inspired to be a part of achieving this vision? Now, of course, this vision is only going to resonate if it is grounded in the evidence that comes from customer discovery, and that will make sure that it is both inspirational and actionable for the product and engineering teams. If you're seeking to expedite the creation and communication of a product vision for your company, please do reach out to me for information on my product leader coaching and consulting services. This is the work that I love to do, and I'd love to help you accelerate your success as a new product leader.